Rosai, good tavach. It is a schos baruch Hashem to be able to learn with you virtually. I look forward to Eretz and being back with everyone by the end of this week. Halavai will be zochim Eretz to be together in Eretz Yisroel. But if I have to come back, it's a chatzi nechama to know that Eretz Hashem will be able to learn together in person. So to thank Rabbi Richter, to thank Rabbi Malevsky, it's a schos baruch Hashem to begin the new week together. A good tavach. And today's daf is daf Chaf Vav 26. We are going to pick up at the Mishnah on Chaf Hamid base 25b. The Mishnah reads as follows. Similar, the same motif that we've been going through this entire time. One should distance an ilan, a tree. So I'm planting a tree, my friend has a bar, Reuven has a bar, I should distance my tree from the bar 25 amas. Again, the logic of 25 amas being that again the roots grow out, and therefore I have to be careful that the roots of my tree do not negatively impact or erode the walls of my friend's bar. But with if the tree is a carob tree or a sycamore tree, 50 amas is a greater distance, because apparently these trees have root systems which extend for longer distances. Bein milamala, bein minatzad. This is true ultimately, again, whether the tree is above the pit, right, at the same level of the pit, imabar kadma, so great. So however, whatever the positioning of the tree is to the bar, ultimately, again, you still need this distance. Okay, imabar kadma, what happens if the pit was there first, then kotzeitz v'nosein damim. So if the pit was there first and someone went ahead and planted a tree, ultimately, again, he could order the cutting down of the tree. So the owner of the pit could go ahead and impose upon the owner of the tree to go ahead and cut down the pit, v'nosein damim. But this is interesting, but the owner of the pit has to go ahead and reimburse the owner of the tree for his loss. Now, what's the logic behind this? Rashi says over v'nosein damim dechevan debershus nata sheno mazik atzman godol lo cheivu chachamim lakos below damim b'shul hezik diyachid. So this is actually very interesting. So remember, the idea of distancing a tree from a pit is not a din in immediate damage. It's damage that will potentially occur later on. Assuming that the roots grow, and assuming that the roots grow at a particular distance, this is damage that we anticipate happening. So halacha l'maisa, if someone ended up planting the tree, so we could force the removal of the tree, but since the damage is not actually happening right now, so therefore the owner of the pit really has to compensate the owner of the tree. An interesting halacha. Then ilan kadam lo yakot. However, again, if the tree obviously was there before the pit, then halacha l'maisa, the owner of the pit then chose to dug the pit in close proximity to the tree. He can't order the owner of the tree to cut down anything. Savik zeh kadam, savik zeh kadam. What happens if you're not sure exactly which one came first? Then halacha l'maisa lo yakot. So again, that's more like a motzi mechaver lavarayat type of idea. So if you don't know which came first, the tree or the pit, so then really the owner of the pit, the owner of the bar, can't force the owner of the tree to go ahead and cut down his tree, and ultimately it's upon the owner of the pit to prove that the tree that he was there before the tree. So therefore the Gemara says lo yakot. So Rabbi Yossi says Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi holds in general, we've seen this already before. Rabbi Yossi says even in a case where the bar came before the ilan, lo yakots. Ultimately, again, so this is where now again, so let's say Reuben dug his pit before I dug my tree. Tanakama would hold, I'm not allowed to dig my tree, I'm not allowed to plant the tree, and if I did so, I'm obligated to cut it down. Rabbi Yossi says, even if the pit was there before, I could still plant my tree, even if I'm planting it in close proximity. Why? So Gemara says, Shazeh chofer b'sok shalo, v'zeh notea b'sok shalo. Rabbi Yossi says like this: you're allowed to do whatever you want in your property. And as long as you're operating within the purview of your property, then no one has the right to stop you. Now again, Rashi points out over here, no Rashi yet. So we're going to see, by the way, that in general, Rabbi Yossi's opinion is that ultimately the damaged party has the obligation to remove himself from being damaged. So Rabbi Yossi essentially says is like this, that halacha l'maisa, halacha gives you the right to do whatever you want to do in your property, as long as when you're doing it, you're not actively encroaching upon someone else. Since here again at the time, right, Reuven has his pit. At the time that I planted my tree, am I doing anything? No. Well, okay, maybe the roots will grow out later on, but that's not right now. Right now, as long as I'm operating within the confines of my rishus, that is totally fine. So the ongoing machlokes says the Gemara Tana bein shabar lamata ve'in lamala bein shabar lamala ve'in lamata. So remember again, the Mishnah said that the din, the obligation to distance the tree from the pit, applies whether the pit is above and the tree is below. In other words, let's say that they're on different levels, different gradings. Or bein shabar lamala ve'ilan lamato, or the pit is above and the tree is below. So it says Rabbi Shmuel bar lamata ve'ilan lamala. So I understand in the case where the bar is below and the tree is above, ka'azlinan shurashav maskil lebar, because then the roots of the tree will actively grow. Right? If the tree is above, if the tree is above and the bar is below, that means the root system is going to dig into the bar. However, again, the Gemara says, Ela bar lamala ve'ilan lamata amai. But if the pit is above and the tree is below, so then what are the roots going to do to the bar? So the Gemara says, Am Rabbi Chaga mishem Rabbi Yosi meshem machlidin es akarka umalakin es karkiosa shabar. No, here's the issue. Even though in this case over here, where the bar is above and the tree is below, so the roots are growing in underneath the bar. Even if the roots don't actually go into the walls of the bar, they're going to be weakening the soil underneath the bar, and over time could cause the pit to cave in. Rabbi Yossi says, "Afapi shabar kodemas leilan lo yakos shezeh chover b'soch shalo." Rabbi Yossi says, even though the pit came before the ilan, Rabbi Yossi holds that halacha l'maisa, the owner of the pit cannot go ahead and impose upon the owner of the tree not to plant the tree. As long as everyone is acting in their own property, halacha l'maisa, neither could stop the other. Rabbi Yossi. Supposed to say the halacha. Now again, this is an important idea over here. The halacha follows Rabbi Yossi when halacha Rabbi Yossi says like this: everyone is allowed to do whatever they want in their own property, as long as at the time that they're doing it, there is no active damage that they're causing to the other. So remember, the whole premise of this Mishnah is that we're being roa asal. We're seeing what's coming down the pike. So I'm planting a tree. Trees have roots. Roots grow. We've already established often roots grow sideways. So if I plant a tree in too close of a proximity to my neighbor's bar, there's a very real possibility that over time, my root system for my tree is going to grow into the Ruvain's bar and adversely impact his bar. Rabbi Yossi says, listen, the way we look at these situations is right here and now. Is what I'm doing negatively impacting Ruvain? And the answer is no. The answer is no. I'm planting my tree. The roots right now, the roots are just right here. They're not anywhere but right under the tree. What's going to happen? Rabbi Yossi says, we can't concern ourselves with that. Halacha l'maisa, right now what I'm planting is in my own property, totally fine. So the Gemara says something very interesting. Therefore again, Rabbi Yehuda says, name Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Am Ravashi, Kiyavan by Rav Kana, Am Rav Ramina, Mod Rabbi Yossi, Bigirei Didei. So this is actually very important, a very important qualification. Rabbi Yossi says, yeah, as long as you're working, as long as you're operating in your own property, you can do whatever you want. In other words, that's assuming you're not causing any active damage right now. But even according to Rabbi Yossi, if you're actively causing someone else damage, even though you're operating within your own property, halacha l'maisa, even Rabbi Yossi would agree that you can't do that. That's called girei didei. Girei didei means your own arrows. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, girei didei. So this is very important. Rabbi Yossi is disagreeing with the Tanakama, that the Tanakama is being raw. So the Tanakama is saying, you plant a tree now, and sometime later on, that root system is going to grow into Ruvain's pit. So the Tanakama says, therefore, we're going to prevent you from planting the tree in too close proximity now, because of what may happen later on. Rabbi Yossi says, we don't look at that. We don't look at that. As long as what you're doing in this present moment is not causing anyone any damage, and you're operating in your own property, go for it. But even Rabbi Yossi would agree that if you're causing someone direct damage now, even though you're operating in your own property, even Rabbi Yossi would agree that you can't do. That's called girei delay. Your arrows, just like your arrow, again, is actively causing someone damage right now. So too, even if you're operating within the confines of your own property, but you're actively causing someone present damage, halacha l'maaseh, you're not allowed to do that. The Gemara tells the story. The Gemara says, Papai Yonah ani v'ha'eshir. So this guy, Papai Yonah, that was his name. Rashi says, Kach Shmo al Shem Komo. That was his name. Papai Yonah, he was poor and he became rich. Good for him, right? Baruch Hashem. Good, he was poor and he became rich. So what happened? Bana Apadno. So now Baruch Hashem became rich. And what did he do? He built a mansion. It's interesting, whether or not that's the right thing to do with his newfound. You see this sometimes where people come into incredible amounts of money, right? Sometimes you hear these stories of these people who win these major lotteries, and within a very short amount of time, they've blown through all the money, just spending on the most ridiculous and crazy things. So it's interesting over here. So this guy, Papa Yonah, he was poor, became rich. What did he do? He built a mansion. Okay, not a judgment. He built a mansion. So what happened? So what happened? In his neighborhood, there were these guys who were crushing sesame seeds. They're making sesame seed oil, so they were pounding the seeds. Well, what happened? As a result of the pounding of the seeds, the pounding created vibrations. The vibrations shook the walls of the mansion. The vibrations shook the wall of the mansion. Also came to Ravashi, so he came before Ravashi. So now Papai, this guy Papai Yonah says, listen, you gotta get these guys to stop pounding the sesame seeds, because at the end of the day they're causing vibrations in my mansion. So he came before Ravashi, Amarle, ki havon be'Rav Kahana havamin al modi Rav Yosef b'giri dilei. So ultimately, again, so essentially Ravashi said, when I learned before Rav Kahana said that even Rabbi Yossi agrees in a case of where it's your own arrows. In other words, even Rabbi Yossi agrees that even when you're operating within the confines of your own rishus, if you're actively causing damage to someone else, then halacha l'maisa, you could be ordered to stop. So again, what Ravashi was essentially saying over here is, even though these guys are pounding the sesame seeds in their own rishus, right, they're doing it in their own domain, but halacha l'maisa, it's causing direct damage to this guy Papai Yonah, and therefore they should be ordered to stop. Incredible. V'kama. Now this is actually an interesting shayla. We'll say top of Chavav 26. It's actually an interesting shayla. So now this guy Papai Yonah is complaining about the vibrations of the walls in his mansion. So the Gemara says, by the way, just in general, when it comes to vibrations, how much of a vibration is enough to be considered to be damage? Right? In other words, that's like, how much does the wall have to shake? How much does the structure have to shake in order for you to be able to have a claim against someone, to be able to get them to stop from doing whatever work that they're doing? To which the Gemara says, top of Chavav 26a, Kidinayid nachtema apuma dechatzba. The vibrations are strong enough that it would shake the lid off a barrel. Like if you have a barrel and the lid is sitting on top, not sealed, but it's just resting on top, the vibrations are enough that it would shake the lid off the barrel. So if someone else is doing work, even though they're doing it in their property, but the vibrations that they're generating are strong enough to shake the lid off your barrel, then that halacha l'maisa is enough of a claim to get them to stop. Incredible. The Bei Bar Marion, Berei de Ravin. So we'll say, so the Gemara says like this: Bei Bar Marion, son of Ravin, ki have nafzi kisna have azla riksa umaska inshi. It's an interesting case. So in the house of Bar Marion, right in the house of Bar Marion, the son of Ravin, they were beating flax. When they would beat flax, so the chaff, right, like the psols, the stuff that would come off, would go ahead and it would fly through the air. Azla riksa is like Rashi says over mashaminar min apishtan. That's like the psols. That's the stuff you don't want. That's like the waste matter from the flax. It would be carried through the air, and maskinchi, it would hurt people, harm people. I don't know. They would breathe it in, get in their eyes. It would harm people. So what happened? Also looking at Ravina. So they brought this case before Ravina. Again, apparently the neighbors brought Bar Marion to a dintar before Ravina, wanting him to stop beating the flax. So interesting, if Ravina wanted to say like this is not the same kind of case. When does Rabbi Yossi say that if you're doing something in your own rishos and it damages someone else, that you could be ordered to stop? That's in a situation where the damage is happening through your own direct force. However, the Gemara says, "Haha zekahu dekamem matile." But in this case over here with the flax, it is the wind that is taking ultimately again that what the Gemara calls the riksa, right? That waste material and carrying it. So in other words, it's not the act of the beating of the flax that's causing damage. It's the beating of the flax creates the waste matter, and then the wind takes the waste matter and blows it into the neighbors. So it's the wind ultimately that's causing the damage, not Bar Marion. And therefore, again, Ravina wanted to suggest that even Rabbi Yossi would agree that in this case, as long as Bar Marion is operating in his own rishos, he can't be forced to stop. Very interesting. So maskifla mar baravashi maishna mizora baruch mesayaito. So here's the interesting part. It'd be so beautiful to do this on a Matzah Shabbos. One of the lamites malachos is zorea, or zora, I should say. Zora means winnowing. So the way you do winnowing is you take a fork, you take the wheat with the chaff, you throw it up in the air, and the wind does the initial act of bora, separating out the ocha from the psols, the food from the waste matter. So the Gemara said that's a malacha on Shabbos. That's a malach on Shabbos. So the Gemara says you're chayav for that. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishna mizar v'ruach mesayaito." So again, yet here you're utilizing the power of the wind, and yet it's counted as if you did the action yourself. So you see from here that utilizing the wind or the power of the wind in conjunction with your own actions is still considered to be your arrows, your action. So I said before, Amir said, you're right. The truth is, the flax case should be no different than the winnowing case. And just like in the winnowing case, you are chayav for winnowing on Shabbos, even though the wind is doing part of the work. So in the flax case, Bamarion should be ordered to stop because he's damaging other people with the riksa from the beating of the flax. So the Gemara says, Uluravina maishna miget sayotzi mitachas hapatish vehezik techayiv. So Ravina, why should this case be any different than another case? You can say in this case, I'm a blacksmith, right? I'm a blacksmith, and I'm banging the metal, and what happens? A spark comes out from underneath the hammer, the anvil, and goes out and damages someone. In that case, I'm chayiv. But again, don't we say maybe it's the wind also that's going ahead and carrying the spark? To which the Gemara says, Hasam nechale delezel, hachalo nechale delezel. Here's the difference, according to Ravina. In the case, ultimately, again, of the blacksmith, the smith wants the spark to go away. He doesn't want the spark. He doesn't want the fire anywhere near him. So therefore, he bangs it hard in an effort to get the spark far away. So he wants it to travel. That's why when it does travel and injures someone, he's chayav for that because he wants it to travel. In the case of the beating of the flax, according to Ravina, so the guy beating the flax, he doesn't care if the riksa, if the waste material stays here or goes away. In other words, he doesn't need it to fly to the Eretz. He just needs the flax to be separated over here and the waste to go over here. But he doesn't need it to fly a distance. That's the fundamental distinction. So let's say, so bottom line, by the way, just you should know, the way we paskin, Rambam paskin is like Rabbi Yossi. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, as long as you are operating within the confines of your own domain, you are permitted halacha l'maisa to go ahead and do whatever you want to do. Even though perhaps something you're doing now may cause damage to someone else in the future, essentially we look at what the situation is now and not what it could potentially become in the future. Again, but even Rabbi Yossi agrees that if you're operating in your own domain, but Allah Chalamaisa, you're doing something now that causes someone else damage, you can't claim, well look, I'm operating in my own rishus, I can do whatever I want. No, if what you're doing in your own rishus actively damages someone else, that you can't do. And I will say there's a profound hashkafa l'mais in this as well, because the truth is, machlokas Tanakh Rabbi Yossi is how much do we have to think about the future when going ahead and acting in the present. So the Tanakh says, listen, before you do anything, you got to think about what it's going to be. And Rabbi Yossi essentially says that if you start thinking about what's going to be in the future before you act in the present, you're never going to do anything, because l'maisa, anything and everything could turn out well or it could turn out very badly. Rabbi Yossi says life is all about calculating your actions in the present, right now, based on where, even though again, Chazal tell us, you have to be ro'a as hanola, you have to see what's going to happen. But the truth is, very often in life, it's difficult to forecast what's going to be. And life is all about making the best decisions in the here and now. Based on where I am right now, based on the circumstances in front of me, based on the information I have at hand, what is the best life decision I could make? Again, if the decision is clearly bad, that's girei delay, that's your own arrows, certainly you can't do it. But other than that, this may happen, that may happen. Sometimes when a person overanalyzes all the different possibilities of what could go wrong in life, it leads to one inescapable conclusion, which is analysis paralysis. Analyze anything enough, and there's so much danger, there's so much risk, you're better off not doing anything. Rabbi Yossi says, as long as what you're doing right now is not damaging anyone, as long as what you're doing right now is not negatively impacting anyone, as long as what you're doing right now in the present makes sense, then you're allowed to do it. It's true halacha l'maisa and it's true hashkafa l'maisa. How many times in life we presented with incredible opportunities for growth, and whether it's material growth or spiritual growth, and the truth is we begin to think about, well, what about this? What about that? You see this all the time. People get locked into dead-end careers because they're so afraid to make a move. Because, well, one second, I have job security, I have this, I have my benefits, and of course those are all important things. But they're so worried about, well, if I do this, this will happen, that'll happen. And in Ruchnius also, I want to take on this extra learning, I want to take on this extra davening, I want to take on an extra tzedakah, an extra this, but what about this, what about that? Analyze anything enough, and the only conclusion you're going to come to is inaction. Life is all about looking at the circumstances in front of you, looking at the range of possibilities in front of you, and making an informed decision in your present. Rabbi Yossi says, don't let yourself fall into the clutches of analysis paralysis. Says the Mishnah, Lo yita adam ilan samach l'salei chabeiro, ela im kein hirchek mimenu arba amo. So we'll say, so now this is a different case over here. In this Mishnah, in the previous Mishnah, we were worried about root systems, right? We were worried about the fact that the roots grow out and damage. Here, we're not worried about roots for whatever the reason. Let's say I know for sure there's no root issue. You have a concrete wall that runs all the way down into the ground, or the type of tree only has roots that grow down. Whatever the Metzias is, there's no problem with roots over here. So what is the problem over here? So the Mishnah says you can't plant lo yita adam ilan samach l'sadei chaver ela imken hirchek bimena arba amos. I can't plant a tree in proximity to my friend's field within Dalet Amos. I have to leave Dalet Amos of distance. Why Dalet Amos of distance? So this is a din in the plow. This is a din in the plow. So this ultimately, again, is that halacha l'maisa, the tree needs to be plowed. So therefore, again, if you plant it right up next, if I plant my tree right on the border of my field with Ruvain, the plow is going to end up going onto Ruvain's field. This way you leave Dalet Amos. Dalet Amos is the amount of space you need to plow. And therefore, again, I could take care of the tree and the area around the tree also without encroaching on Ruvain's property. This is true whether it's vines or any tree. What if there was a wall between my field and Ruvain's field? Then says something like So again, then we could each go ahead and plant up to the tree, because since there's a physical barrier, my plow is not going to go into Ruvain's field because there's a physical barrier that is dividing between us. Okay. What happens if halacha l'maisa, my roots extended into my friend's field? So what's the halacha? Mamik gimel tfachim k'dish lo ya'akev esamach harisha. So Reuven has the right to dig down up to 3 tfachim and dig up my roots, in order that my roots not interfere with his plow, because the plow apparently goes down into the earth a depth of 3 tfachim. We don't want his plow to get caught on my roots. My roots shouldn't really be in his field, and therefore Allah he has a right to dig down. Again, now let's say Reuven was digging a pit, bar siach or all different types of pits, underground structures. So then halacha l'maisa, he could go ahead and he kotzeitz v'yo, right? So again, there he could dig as deep as he needs to dig, and he could uproot and cut away all the roots that he needs to. Va'itzim shalo, but the wood of the roots belongs to him. Now, who is the him, right? Does it belong to me, the owner of the tree, or Reuven, the owner of the field? That we're going to see in the Gemara. So here we go. So Tana, Arba Amos Amru Kedei Avodas HaKerem. So we'll say, remember again now, the Mishnah said you have to distance a tree. I have a tree, Reuven has a field, we're neighbors. I have to distance my tree from the border 4 amos. And all right, the Gemara says, why is that? Kedei Avodas HaKerem. This is enough space to work the field, literally to work the vineyard, right? To work the orchard. It's enough to, in other words, the plow gets through there. That's enough. So therefore, I don't have to encroach on Reuven's property. This is only true in Eretz Yisroel, so that you need 4 amos. Aval beBavel 2 amos. In Bavel, apparently they had smaller plows. So in Bavel, all you needed was a space of 2 amos. Eretz Yisroel had wider plows. Bavel had thinner plows. So in Eretz Yisrael, I need a distance of 4 amos between my tree and the border and Reuven's field. And in Bavel, you only need 2 amos. Incredible time. That supports this. A person can't plant a tree next to the field of his friend unless he distanced it 2 amos. First why line Tanan Arba Amos. But we learned Arba Amos, 4 amos. Rather, you see like Shmuel, it's talking about 2 different things. 4 amos is in Eretz Yisrael, 2 amos is in Bavel. The Ika, the Rami Leim Birma. Others actually quote this not more as like a question and answer, or a contradiction and an answer. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Lo Yita Adam Ilon Samach L'Sadei Chaver Elim Hinei Arba Amos. Our Mishnah said, I can't plant a tree in close proximity to my friend's field unless I leave a distance of Dalet Amos. V'atanya, but we learned in a Brisa, Shtei Amos. So there's a contradiction between our Mishnah, which says you need 4 amos between a tree and a field, and the Brisa that says you only need 2 amos. It's not a contradiction. Kan beBavel, kan beEretz Yisrael. So again, one is talking about Bavel. Bavel is the Brisa, you only need 2 amos. Our Mishnah is talking about Eretz Yisrael, where you need 4 amos. A difference in just plowing technologies. Eretz Yisrael had wider plows, and Bavel they had narrower plows. Incredible. Rava bar Rav Chanan Havili Hano Dikoli Amitzvah de Bar Desa de Rav Yosef. Interesting case here. Story. Rava bar Rav Chanan had palm trees, and they were planted at the border that bordered a pardes, an orchard of Rav Yosef. Okay, so again, 2 great rabbanim. Rava has palm trees planted right by the border with Rav Yosef, and on Rav Yosef's field, he has an orchard. Okay, so what happened? So what ended up happening was something very interesting. So the birds would come and they would nest on the palm trees of Rava, and after nesting on the palm trees of Rava, they would go into the orchard of Rav Yosef and eat the trees. They didn't eat the fruit. So they nested in the palm trees of Rava, and then went into the field of Rav Yosef to go and eat the fruit. So what happened? So the Gemara says, so yeah, good. Amrle zil goats. So Rav Yosef said to Rava, cut down your palm trees. Your palm trees are causing me a loss. Amrle v'har chikali. So Rav Yosef says, I don't have to. I distance them. In other words, they're dalet amas. The halacha, I followed the Mishnah. They're dalet amas away from your field. So I have no further obligation to do anything. So Rav Yosef responds, the distance of dalet amas ultimately again is only when you're distancing from other trees. But if you have a tree and you're distancing it from vines, apparently again he had like a vineyard in addition to the orchard, right? You need even a greater amount of distance. Really? So obviously, really, we learned echad gifanim ve'echad kol ilan. Amrale. So ultimately, again, so Rava responds, but that's not the halacha. The halacha says that it doesn't matter whatever you're distancing from, as long as you don't have a root problem. You just have to distance. I have to distance my item from my neighbor's field, dalet amas. And Rava says, I did that. I distanced my palm trees from your orchard, from your vines, dalet amas. So interestingly enough, Rav Yosef responded that it's only true when it's like items. So if I have a tree and my neighbor has a tree, or I have vines and my neighbor has a vine, in that case where we have like items, dalet amas is enough. But in a case where one neighbor has a tree and the other neighbor has vines, there's an obligation to distance the tree even further from the vines. Again, to prevent exactly this type of damage, where the birds essentially are going to nest on one tree, and then again, they literally have a bird's eye view into the fruit in the neighboring field. It's creating a hezek situation. Amrale analog kaitzina. Ultimately, again, Amrale analog kaitzina. So this is very interesting. So Rava said, it's almost as if Rava said to her, say, fine, I'll accept your. I don't agree with you, but I'll accept your point, but I'm not cutting down the palm trees. Why am I not cutting down the palm trees? Because there's an issue about tashchis. You're not allowed to destroy perfectly good palm trees. Now here's what's interesting. So there's a prohibition about tashchis. Tashchis says you can't engage in wanton or unnecessary destruction. Now what's interesting to note is something is only considered to be unnecessary or wanton if there's not a need. Obviously if there's a need, you're allowed to do it. So what's interesting in this case over here is the pashtas, there's a need, right? Because again, the birds are nesting on Rava's trees and going in and destroying Rav Yosef's produce. But what Rav was saying is for me, I'm not doing anything wrong. I feel I'm in the right because I distance my trees. Okay, I don't want to fight, so I'm happy to give in to you. You think I'm damaging you? Fine, cut down the trees, but I'm not cutting them down myself because for me, I think it'll be about tashchis. But if you want to, gei gesund to hate. So Rav Chanina, let's listen to this. Rav Chanina said, "Lo shachiv shichachas beri, ela dekatz te'enasa below zmanei." So this is fascinating. Just actually a little bit overwhelming. Rav Chanina said that my son, shichachas, my son, only died because I cut down a teina. I cut down a fig tree, ultimately again before its time. So as I said, that's also like just I don't know. I didn't have a chance to get my eye into that. Although there's more about Bava, so I have to go back to my notes and see again if we spoke about it back then. But it's actually a very overwhelming statement. The Rav Chanina says, my son Shichachas died only because I cut down a premature, right, a teina tree before its time. Now, it's also interesting over here that this lashon of Shichachas, interesting name. And Shichachas is from like lashon of forgetfulness. So ultimately, again, I think that there's what to say on this. That perhaps Rav Chanina is saying is like this, that lo shachiv shichas beri. Sometimes a son in just Talmudic lingo also means like our maisim, our actions, our mitzvos, our accomplishments are also called our children, right? Ela told us, Noach. Sometimes, again, the greatest thing that tzaddikim create are their own maisim tovim, are their own self. And so maybe what Chanina is saying is like this, that sometimes, the way we lose out on life is we cut things down prematurely. What does this mean? Just say it outside first, then we'll read into the words. That sometimes in life we embark upon a particular life mission, right? We have an idea, we have a goal, we have an aspiration, a dream. I take something on. And then what happens? I encounter a little bit of turbulence. And all too often, what happens after we encounter turbulence in life? We give up. We just give up. We just simply give up. And which is crazy because we live with this misguided notion that if something's meant to be, it should be easy. You see this like in relationships, right? People encounter relationship turbulence and they say, oh, it's terrible, it's not gonna work. Why? Because if it was meant to be, it should be easy. And the truth is, there's nothing further from the truth. Beautiful relationships always have turbulence and require incredible work. And beautiful life initiatives, if something in life is meaningful and worth having, chances are you're going to have to struggle. And the more meaningful and more profound it is, the more you're going to have to struggle. And the true tragedy in life is that we start on things and then they become too difficult, so we just give it up, right? How many of us have life closets filled with half-started projects? Half-started projects. I took this on, I took that on. I started learning this, I started doing this. I made this Kabbalah, that Kabbalah. So why did we stop? It's simple. It's almost always the same for all of us. It just became a little bit too difficult. The moment it became a little bit too difficult, simply I throw in the towel. And perhaps that's the pshat, in an agadic sense, that's the pshat. Lo shachiv shichachas beri. So Chanina is saying, I had a son, right? I have so many things that I began to produce. So many dreams, goals, visions, things that I wanted. So many, right? That's children. So many things I wanted to produce. But they become forgotten. Shichachas. They became forgotten. They started and then they were forgotten about. Why? I cut down the fig tree before it was ripe. I gave in. I threw in the towel. I gave up before I reached the finish line. So again, obviously, on the Pasha, Rabbi Chanina, again, Rav is quoting this as saying that halacha l'maisa, you don't cut down fruit trees unnecessarily. But perhaps on a deeper hashkafic level, Rabbi Chanina is saying, Lo shachiv shichachas beri. My life is filled with things that I birthed, but then forgot about. Why? Because I cut them down prematurely. Because I just simply threw in the towel. I'll say, how many things do we start and we don't finish? How many dreams do we begin to actualize and then we just stop simply because it becomes a little bit too difficult, becomes a little bit too inconvenient, or it just doesn't fit in the way that I thought it was going to fit in? How many things have we begun to birth, but then we forgot about them because we cut them down? We gave up on them prematurely. In any event, so Rabbi says to Rabbi Yosef, if you want to cut it down, but I'm not cutting it down. So the Gemara goes right. The Gemara says, Mar inei, if you want to cut it down. Okay, so that's the end of the story. It's actually interesting. The Gemara doesn't say is, did Rabbi Yosef cut it down? Didn't he cut it down? I don't know. But in any event, the Rava said, if you want it, take it, but I'm not doing it. So Rav Papa had palm trees. So Rav Papa, by the way, also, can you imagine these neighborhoods, right? He got Rav Papa living next to his neighbor with Rav Huna. I would want to live on that block. So Rav Papa had palm trees on the border in a field bordering with Rav Huna, Braid Rav Yoshua. So Azal Ashkechei the Chafar the Ka'etz Shirashav. So Rav Papa saw that Rav Huna was digging down. Now, Rav Huna was in his property, and he was digging in his property. He was digging up the roots of Rav Papa's trees, right? So Rav Papa has the palm trees, and he sees Rav Huna in Rav Huna's property digging up the roots from Rav Papa's trees. Okay, so the Amarle, my high. So Rav Papa says, "What are you doing? Why are you digging up the roots?" Amarle Tina. So Rav Huna said, "What do you mean? We're learning the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that Allah Chalamaysa, if my neighbor has a tree and his roots are growing into my field, I could dig down 3 tvachim in order that the roots not get caught on my plow." So Rav Papa said, 1 second. So Rav Papa says, okay, 3 tvachim, but you're digging much deeper than 3 tvachim. I'm okay, because I'm not digging for a plow, I'm digging a pit. I'm digging a pit, right? I'm putting in a pool, I'm putting in a mikvah, right? I'm just digging a pit, so I need to go much deeper down. And we learned this nan hayachofer bar siachumara kotates v'yard va'etzim shalom. We learned in the Mishnah that if you're digging a pit, you could dig down as far as you need to, and you could uproot. You could dig up whatever roots are there, and the wood from the roots, so to speak, belong to him. Now, who the him is, we'll have to see. Amra Papa, Amrile Kuli. So Rav Papa says. So apparently, Rav Papa gave Rav Huna many different rayas, brought in many different proofs as to why Rav Huna should not dig up the roots. But Rav Papa said, I gave him a lot of different rayas as to why he shouldn't dig up the roots, but he wouldn't listen to me. Amud Beis, Chavav Amud Beis, at the Amrilei, until I said to him, Hadam Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said, Meitzah she'ef zikul barabim asur lekalkalo. So listen to this. Finally, this is actually very interesting. Finally, Rav Papa said to Rav Huna like this, those roots have been there for a very long time. And there's a halacha that says that literally, again, if the person has a field, so Mesa literally means a border. Let's say a person has a border of his field, and the public has been making use of that border as a thoroughfare for public use for a long time. So the owner of that border can't suddenly decide that halacha Mesa, I don't want anyone traversing it anymore. We've seen this halacha before, that once the public has used something for a certain amount of time, and the owner never objected to the public's use, so the owner then can't wake up one day and decide to take it back for himself. So if Papa posited, my roots have been in your field for a very long time, and you never said anything, so you're not objection to it, right? Silence is acquiescence, and therefore, again, you accepted them there. Because you accepted them there, you can't now go ahead and uproot them now. Interesting. So the Gemara says, so essentially, Rashi points out to here, essentially what Rav Papa was saying to Rav Huna is, I have a chazaka. As Rashi says, Va'ana nami ha'ach zikilei. I have a chazaka. In other words, I have a chazaka that my roots are in your property. And with that, Rav Huna stopped digging up the roots. This is actually interesting. The Gemara says, Basra dinafak amar amaylo amri le kan besok sheish esrei ama kan chutz l'sheish esrei ama. So after Rav Papa left, Rav Huna said, I should have said the following. That's true for the first 16 amos of roots, but I was digging up the roots outside of 16 amos. So we're going to see this in just a little bit. Take a look at Rashi. Beso sheish esrei ama le'ilon havye chazaka de'ilon aval chutz l'sheish esrei ama ein ches kaso chazaka she'af api shesh rasha nispashtin chafei ama. So we're going to see this in just a little bit. I was going to expound on this in just a bit. So apparently, a tree derives the overwhelming majority of its sustenance and nutrients from the first 16 amos of roots. Anything beyond that is not really contributing anything to the tree. So therefore, again, after Papa left, Rav Huna said, I should have said back to him, even if you have a chazaka, your chazaka is only on the first 16 amos of the roots. Apparently, Rav Huna was digging up past the first 16 amos. So after that, that's not doing any, you never had a chazaka on that anyway, and therefore I should have gone ahead and I should be halachically entitled to go ahead and uproot that. Interesting. Okay. But I'll just point out that Tosfos has a whole arichos on this over here, that the truth is the comparison anyway between something used by the public versus an individual is not really a good comparison, but okay, we'll leave it for a different time. So remember again, so now again, here's what we got from the Mishnah, right? So the Mishnah taught me as follows. The Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, I have to distance my tree from my neighbor's field. Now, halacha l'maisa, if my roots extend into Reuven's field. So what's the halacha? So first of all, if Reuven's going ahead and needs to plow his field, he could dig up roots within 3 tefachim of the top of the soil, because otherwise the plow is going to get stuck on those roots. That's the first halacha. Second halacha, if Reuven wants to dig a pit, he could dig down as much as he wants and remove whatever roots are in his way. That's the halacha. And again, and the Mishnah said, Va'itzim shalo, and the wood of the roots belongs to him. So who's the him? So the Gemara says, Boy min Rav Yaakov, Hadaiba mirav Chisda. So Rav Yaakov of Hadaiba, that's the name of the place, Hadaiba, said to Rav Chisda, asked Rav Chisda, Eitzim shalmi. Who did the roots? So again, so now I have the tree, my roots grew into Reuven's field, okay, even though I distanced it, right? My roots grew into Reuven's field. Now Reuven has a right, and now Reuven wants to dig a pit. So he could dig down and he could uproot my roots. So now the Mishnah said, and the roots belong to him. So ask Rav Yaakov of Rav Chisda, who do the roots belong to? Do the roots belong to Ruvain, the owner of the field, or the roots belong to me, the owner of the tree? Eitzim Shalmi. So the Gemara says, so Rav Chisda responded, Teniso, we learned it. Shrasha Ilan Shal Hadyot, Habayim B'Shal Hadyot. This is an interesting case. So listen, I watch this. So let's say I have a tree. And let's say the roots of my tree extend into a field that belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. So extend into a field of Hekdish. So what's the halacha? Lo nenin v'lo mo'alin. So ultimately, again, I'm not permitted to get benefit from those roots. But if I do, there's no me'ila, which essentially means it's asr midrabanan. Asr midrabanan. Rashi says, Lo nenin midrabanan v'lo mo'alin. So right, so ultimately, again, I really shouldn't get hana. But if I did, it's not me'ila. So let's analyze this. So this makes sense if you say that roots, the status of the roots follow the tree. Mishum hachi lo mo'alin. That's why there's no me'ila. Really what it's saying is the roots really belong to the tree. And therefore, again, they're not hekdish. But midrabanan, since it's growing in a consecrated field, I really shouldn't use it. I shouldn't get hana, but if I did, there's no me'ila. So that makes sense if you say that the roots really belong to the tree, which then extending it to this case, even though Reuven's allowed to dig up the roots, right, to dig his pit, but the wood of the roots really should come back to me, the owner of the tree, because the roots are mine. But if you say that halacha l'maisa, we go after the karka, right? That ultimately, in other words, that the status of the roots is dependent on where they're growing, then I'm ma'ila mo'alin. Then if that's the case, then if I have a tree and the roots grow into a field of hekdish, the roots should be hekdish. Elamai Basra ilan azlinan. Rather, what do you see from here? That the status of the roots goes after the tree. Basra ilan azlinan. So the Gemara says, Ema Seifo, look at the end of the Mishnah. Shel hekdish haboim b'shel hedyot. What about the reverse case? You have a tree of hekdish, right? And the roots of the hekdish tree grow into my field, the hedyot field. So what's the halacha? Lo nanin v'lo mo'alin. Ultimately, once again, lo nanin, you shouldn't get benefit from it. But if you did, there's no me'ila. Says the Gemara, v'i basar ilan azlinon. Now, if we go after the tree, if the status of the roots is really determined by the tree, amai lo mo'alin. Ultimately, again, why is there no me'ila? Right? Again, so which one is it? In other words, do the roots go after the status of the tree or don't go after the status of the tree? To which the Gemara says, my area bigidulan haboy la'achami. My area bigidulan haboy la'achami kanaskinan. Oh, so the Gemara says, different case. We're talking about over here about growth that happens after consecration. So I was saying, when you consecrate something, it's actually really interesting, and then the item experiences growth afterwards, then halacha l'maisa, those new growths do not necessarily have the same consecrated status. Very interesting. So the Gemara says, first of all, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Midei area, Maskana the Kushi, Kalomar Mikula Lav area, Hahi, Lo Mashma Minei Basar Ilan, Velo Mashma Minei Basar Karka. So really, again, you can't really create a clear inference at all over here about the status of roots. The time of Mishum, the Hanach Shoshim, Gidulim, Abalim, Achar, Shahuk, Kasha Iloni, Vigil Mandar, Mesachas Mila, in Molam Gidulin, after the Shoshi Hekdish, Sadek Hekdish. So also, listen to this. The Gemara says, Ravina, Amarlo, I'm sorry, Vikasavar, in Ila Gidulin. Now, just to illustrate this case, in Ila Gidulin, let's say you were to be makdish a tree, and after your hekdish, what happens? So the roots grow. Everyone would agree. There's a mantra that says that even those additional roots from a hekdish tree are not kodesh. Let's say it's growing in a hekdish field. So the Gemara says, therefore, over here we're talking about the roots are never going to be consecrated. In this case, whatever the status of the roots are, they're never going to be consecrated, because halacha l'maisa, anything that grows after this consecration has occurred do not have kedusha. Ravina gives a different answer. Ravina says, no, lo kasha. Here we go. Kan besoch sheishesvei amo, kan chutz l'sheishesvei amo. So Ravina wants to suggest the following. This is what we mentioned before. I will say there's a difference in the status of roots. There's the roots for the first 16 amos of roots, and then after the 16 amos of roots. The roots for the first 16 amos are considered to be the primary roots of the tree, which provide the tree with sustenance. Those roots are attached to the tree and have the status of the tree. However, roots after 16 amos, those roots are considered to be separate and distinct from the tree. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Ravina Amar Kasha, Reisha Diktani Basar Ilan Azlinan Hainu Besoch Tes Zayin Amo. So therefore, again, the Reisha that says that the roots follow the status of the tree, that's within the first Tes Zayin, the first 16 amos of roots, which are the primary roots which provide the sustenance of the tree. Ultimately, those have the identity of the tree. The Seiva Diktani Shal Hekdish Boin Besoch Shal Hedjot Lo mo'olin hainu chutz l'tezayin. And ultimately, again, the Seifa that said that a tree of hektish, right, whose roots grow into a chulin field, are not subject to Mi'ilah, that's talking about the roots after the first 16 amas. So in reality, again, the Gemara suggests that everything depends on the positioning of the roots. The first 16 amas of the root system are the primary part of the nourishment and sustenance of the tree. Those roots have the status of the tree. After 16 amas, again, don't have the status of the tree, not necessary. And I will say, therefore, for our purposes, what that means is as follows. So let's take this back to the Mishnah. I planted a tree. My roots grew into Reuven's field. Reuven's digging a bar. He's allowed to go ahead and dig down, and he's allowed to go ahead and uproot whatever pits he needs to take. He's allowed to uproot whatever roots he needs to go ahead and remove. That is the halacha. So now, who do the roots belong to? Who do the roots belong to? To which the Gemara says, it depends. If we're talking about the first 16 amas of roots, then those roots belong to me, the owner of the tree. If, however, again, it's past the first 16 amas of roots, then halacha l'maisa, those roots ultimately, again, will belong to Reuven. He'll be able to keep that wood because halacha l'maisa, it's not considered to be part of the tree. I will say, you know what, we will... Okay, you know what? Let's actually go just a little bit weiter, then we'll stop. So Amr Ula says, actually, I will say we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach, again, I miss all of you so terribly, but at least, again, it's an incredible schos to be able to learn with everyone. Wishing everyone a beautiful day, a gute vach, and halavai, Eretz Hashem should be a week of where all of our hostages are returned, a week of incredible hatzlacha for our precious and holy soldiers, and halavai, a week of Visoros Tovos and Geula for all of Klal Yisrael.